Start recording, Gage. Thank you. All right. So to get started, we are going to just introduce our presenters here today. I'm going to be emceeing or kind of directing this train a little bit. We have 5 of our advisors that are going to be presenting today. Some really useful information, some great review of what happened in the first half of 2023. And then we're going to talk about what do we think is going to happen in the last half of 2023 and some recommendations that you guys can keep in mind, maybe use. First off, we have Lynn, CEO and President of Oxford Wealth Advisors. We've got Gage, the professional financial advisor at Oxford Wealth, Brandon as well, financial advisor and AUM Special Ops Manager, Rich, a financial advisor, and Kyrie, financial advisor. So let's move on to our first section is going to be some upcoming changes. Please pay special attention to this. This is news. We have been trying to communicate this as much as possible, but you kind of want to do it as many times as you can to make sure nobody misses this vital information. So we're going to turn the time over to Brandon to talk to us about some changes that are coming our way for clients and our company.
Perfect. Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, so as many of you have been aware, there's been a lot of changes going on with Oxford Wealth and Schwab and TD Ameritrade. Hopefully by now you've been receiving some mail and you've opened it instead of just throwing it away. But I just wanted to go over just a few of the changes and what the old way was and what we're going to expect going forward. So recently we switched our registered investment advisory firm from Town Square Capital to Portside. That was all due to an internal buyout of Town Square. They're bought out by Orion, and we couldn't deal direct with them. So Portside was created by Town Square employees, and that's where our current license registered investment advisory firm lies. But the big change that we want to talk about is more so on the custodian side. The old way, we had a lot of different custodians to choose. We can go to Charles Schwab, to TD Ameritrade. Those were the 2 main custodians that we're dealing with. If we want to advance the slide real quick, the new way looks like this now. We're all aware the Portside Town Square transition has already happened, and hopefully you didn't notice anything. It was a seamless just transition between those 2 companies, but Town Square is still very much involved on the investment side. The big change coming up, though, is going to be with our custodians. A couple years ago, TD Ameritrade and Schwab basically decided to merge. Schwab, in essence, bought TD Ameritrade out, and through all the years of work, we're starting to see the actual action start to take place this year. So come September, Labor Day weekend, all of our TD Ameritrade, or all of your TD Ameritrade accounts, if they're at TD Ameritrade, are going to switch over to Schwab. Okay, that means a couple things for you as an investor. That's going to change. Again, custodians from TD Ameritrade to Schwab, you're going to receive a new account number. And if you've been accessing your TD Ameritrade account via advisor client, you're going to have to create a new account via Schwab Alliance. So there's going to be some action that will need to be taken care of on your side as the investors to gain access or to regain access to your account once it moves over to Schwab. Okay, so what does that mean for you? What type of changes, Lindsay, if you want to go forward one more slide real quick. As far as the RIA change, nothing impacts your investments, your fees, nothing there. The big change will just be with TD Ameritrade and Schwab. If you're taking out distributions or if you're adding contributions, all of that should seamlessly transfer. We got a great team behind us with Michelle and Sydney that are going to be keeping an eagle eye on all of these accounts to make sure that beneficiaries, all of your RMDs and move money or your distribution and systematic distributions are going through properly as well once that switch to Schwab happens. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on that, but be aware if you see any correspondence from TD Ameritrade or Schwab, make sure that you're opening it because it could provide you some Very important information as we get closer to that final date. And if you have any questions, reach out to us and we'll help you, but do expect a new account number come Labor Day weekend. Okay, so that's just where we are now. New custodian will be Schwab. What to expect, new account number, new client login.
Great, thank you so much, Brandon. If you guys have any concerns, any questions, you can always call us. We are happy to walk you through that and just clarify any concerns or questions that you may have. So what we're going to now switch gears to is 2023 so far. So this is the past 6 months or so up until this point of what has happened in the markets, why maybe you have been feeling some of the things or sensing some of the things that you have in the financial climate. And so we're going to turn the time over first to Lynn B for our product update.
Okay, so before we get into the what's happening, I'm going to just relay a foundation of who we are and what we do as a firm with all of our clientele. And it's never a bad idea to just refocus on the basics. So we teach the green money, yellow money, red money. You're all familiar with that. And there is a difference between principles of saving and principles of investing. Green money is our safe and sound, secure foundation. Yellow money is our low risk money, and the red money is our growth opportunity money. So a certain percent of our money with our clients is directed into those 3 categories. Everybody's different. And we use that. So there you go. We also have something that we call black money, also known as blue money. But that's something I just want to touch on real briefly. Right now, CD rates are the highest they've been in, well, I don't know, 10, 20 years probably. There's CDs that you can get at your local bank. You can get CDs through our firm as well if you want to do CDs. Of course, you're very familiar with what we call multi-year guaranteed accounts, multi-year guaranteed annuities. And we've been educating a lot of clients on those because those rates are extremely high as well. And so the question is really to CD or not CD. And what are the pros and cons of that decision? Talk to us. We can go through those pros and cons with you to help you make that good decision. But again, highest rates we've seen in over 20 years. So get them before they're gone. And so some of our coaching on that is, by golly, if you're going to do that with these high rates, you might want to lock that rate in for not just a 15-month or a 12-month. You might want to lock that in for a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, because where do you think rates will be going in the next year or two? And we'll have some more discussion about that coming up. But again, green money, safe and secure foundation. What we use there typically is our fixed index linked annuities, growth linked to the index for upside performance without any downside risk or exposure, and typically no fees. And we're having some action on our existing index annuities. If you have an index annuity that's a year or two old or older, there are some discussions that we need to have about reboot. Reboot means we take the old chassis that's paying maybe a 2 to 3% return, 2 to 4, and we can reposition it because rates have come up. The new chassis of index annuities, we have caps in the neighborhood of 10% compared to 3 or 4%. And we have a fixed rate on these index annuities of about 4% to 5%, where the old chassis had maybe 1.5 to about 2.25. So there's some big discussion there about, gee, should I trade in part of the old chassis into a new? And that's a discussion called a reboot. You need to be having that conversation with your advisor here at the firm. Yellow money, we've talked about, that's our managed money. And we've got a lot of stuff going on right now with yellow money and custodians and investment advisory, etc. And of course, red money as appropriate to kind of add icing to the cake, so to speak. Another thing, gold and silver, it continues to be a good opportunity. 5 to 10% maybe of your total portfolio might be worth putting into a gold position, just so that you have that diversification. And hey, it protects against inflation. It's a hard asset. The falling dollar issue, and of course, if we get to the point where a dollar's crumbling, you can certainly barter and exchange with a physical asset. Okay, next slide real quick. everybody's familiar with our buckets and how we use buckets to create income streams. And so within our practice, you're all familiar. We use yellow money, we use green money, and we use as needed red money with these buckets. Typically, the bucket 1, 2, and 3 are your black or your green money, typically. And usually we use bucket 3 and 4 could be the yellow and the red money, or just bucket 4 red money. So that's how we use money to create guaranteed income streams, to create safety growth. And a real quick summary of, gee, how are these indexes doing over the last 12 months? This is over the last 12 months. You can see these index annuities participate in market up without any exposure to market down. And so the S&P 500, July 23 of last year to July 23 of this year is up 14.9%. Well, you all know, with all those other indices that you can see there, we don't get that kind of a return on the annuity. We get a piece of it. We get a piece of it. But if we have a cap of 10 versus a cap of 4, that's why I'm talking about the reboot. We need to really look at those existing contracts and see what we can do to trade into the new chassis for you. I think that's about it that I was going to cover on that foundation at this point. So let's turn it back to you.
Thank you, Lynn. We're going to now turn over to the Fed rate update by Gage.
Cool. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. It's good to see a whole lot of good clients. I'm looking through the client list, and we got a good group here. So I was tasked to talk a little bit about the Fed. That's kind of been the hot topic here as of late. Fed increases, we've seen 3 rate increases, actually 4. When we were putting these slides together, we thought the first half would look through June 30th. So February 1st, March 22nd, May 3rd, we saw quarter-point increases. And with the guidance that we're going to have 2 more rate increases, one of which we saw earlier this week. So the Fed funds discount rate has increased 4.5% up to 5.25. And like I mentioned before, we're now sitting at 5.5 with the quarter-point increase that happened today. So Mr. Jay Powell, I think, he gets a lot of flack. I think he's doing an okay job given kind of the grand scheme of things. If we step back and look at where we were 18 months ago and 2 years ago, there were definitely things that should have been done ahead of time. But the Fed has talked a lot about a soft landing. I think we're kind of in the middle of it right now. We haven't seen massive layoffs yet. Bank failures, we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a second. But generally speaking, things are still ticking along. Economy is still staying ahead of schedule. The GDP numbers that were reported earlier this week look pretty good. So from everything that we're seeing, so far, so good. We are kind of facing that soft landing. Now, we don't know. There's still some other concerns. Lindsay, do you want to advance the next slide? So inflation has cooled, but we're keeping a close eye on that. If inflation spikes again, that could be a bigger piece that we need to pay attention to. The yield curve. I know that some of the folks that are on this call that have been around for a while, we talk a lot about this. Yield curve is still sharply inverted. Actually, we are now in the longest inversion we've had since 1980. So that's kind of a scary thing that we're paying attention to. We're seeing job gains, maybe not as strong as we've seen in the last couple of years. Unemployment is still staying relatively low. We're not seeing anything too dramatic with massive layoffs or anything like that. Banking resilience, that's going to be an interesting discussion to see, assuming that increases will continue for the rest of the year. How do some of those regional banks afford to stay in business? The Fed still has that strong goal of making sure that inflation is at 2% or less for year-over-year inflation. So that's going to be something that I think is going to drive a lot of the decisions here moving forward. On this next slide here, this is our good buddy Fred. I know that some of you guys have seen this. Maybe some of you guys are using this. This is the Federal Reserve's economic data website. So what I have here, I pulled, this is the 10-year Treasury minus the 2-year Treasury, what we call the yield curve. If the 10-year Treasury is returning higher than the 2-year, that's a normal yield curve. That's a good thing. Anytime the 2-year Treasury returns more than the 10-year, that's where we have an inversion. And usually that's an indicator of economic stress. And so you can see since July of last year, the yield curve has inverted. we as investors are demanding more shorter term treasuries. What's really interesting about this is the 3-month treasury is returning even more than the 2-year is right now. So if we look at like just across the board, yield curves are heavily inverted, and they're not showing any signs of correction at this point. Now, this doesn't really mean too much for today, but historically, anytime we've had yield curve inversions, recessions and economic turmoil has followed shortly thereafter. We don't quite know what this means at this point. It's been decades since we've seen a yield curve inverted for so long. I would anticipate markets are going to do what the markets do. We're probably going to see some level of recession at some point in the future. We don't know when that is. My own personal guess is we've got to wait for the yield curve to recover before we start to see some of those recessions, but we don't know. So I think the big picture here is that we're not too sure with what the Fed is going to be doing, and hopefully they can steer us for a soft landing, but we need to be prepared kind of regardless of what we do. Now that transitions me to, I was also tasked to talk a little bit about the markets, kind of a snapshot of what the markets have done so far. Our resource here, finance.yahoo.com, many of you use this. The S&P 500 going January 1st to June 30 was up just shy of 16%. The Dow, which is interesting, this is more manufacturing, more banking, stuff like that. They haven't really seen the pop that the S&P 500 has. And the NASDAQ has seen double the pop that the S&P 500 has. The reason for that, we've talked a lot about FANG stocks in the past: Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. I'm sure that there are a handful of others like NVIDIA that should probably replace Netflix. Most of those high tech stocks, though, are driving the markets up right now. Oil, despite gas prices going up, oil is pretty well down or maybe even flat at this point. Gold is up, silver is down, US aggregate bonds are relatively flat. So just kind of looking as a snapshot of where we are in terms of the markets, that's kind of our update on where positions are. And then Lindsay, if you want to advance, this is just a slide Yahoo Finance chart that shows kind of plotted performance since January 1st. It's interesting, at the end of last year, a lot of people were saying 2023 is going to be no different than 2022. The markets don't really care about calendar years. This really flies in the face of that. The markets have been very strong since January 1st. And those of you who have been invested in red and yellow money have seen phenomenal returns as a result of it. Who knows? With any positive volatility, we could see negative volatility as well. So just make sure that you've got the right types of investments in place.
What are some of the lines that you have on here, Gage?
Yeah, so the top line, the heavy blue line is always going to be the S&P 500. So you can see the kind of middle of the road, 15.91%. That's the S&P 5. The light blue colored line down in the 3% range is the Dow Jones. The purple line is the NASDAQ. The pink line is oil futures. So that's kind of the price of oil, where we expect that to be. The orange line is gold futures, so gold market. Yellow line is silver, and then the, I don't know what color that is, turquoise color, I guess, is the bond aggregate. So what corporate bonds are doing right now. Now let's jump on here. Recession watch. Do we think we're in a recession? Honestly, I'm going to put up here the definition of a recession as defined by the National Bureau of Economic Research. The main thing I want to focus on there, a significant decline in economic activity that spreads across the economy and lasts more than a few months. From everything that we've seen, that's always 2 consecutive quarters of GDP decline, which we saw that. Q1 and Q2 of 2022, we saw not huge, but we saw declines in GDP. So we're going to go on and say there are a number of different articles that we're going to agree with here. You can see US News and World Report, NPR, and I think I've got a Bloomberg article up here. Oh, the Street article that talks about we kind of went through that already. The recession, I think, already happened. And anyone who says that there wasn't a recession in 2022 is trying to get reelected or something. I'm going to jump back to the definition here. So take a look at that. Recession is often defined as 2 consecutive quarters of economic contraction, declining real GDP. We saw that already. So check that off the list. We were in a recession in 2022. Will we see a recession in 2023? We haven't seen it so far. And the indicators are actually changing daily. It seems like most large banks aren't expecting any real recession of note. The markets will recess, so that always happens. We will see economic corrections. That's part of what we do. But I think for this year, definitely not so far, definitely not for the first 6 months of the year. And earnings are still looking strong enough that I don't think GDP is going to slow down anytime soon. Now, there will be more discussion on that later, but this is the chart that's going to back this up. We can see through 2019, 2020, the COVID correction, that definitely was a recession. You can see with the red circle there, the GDP ticked down for 2 consecutive quarters. I don't know. I'm counting it. I think that we were in a recession last year, and we'll see where we go from here. But anyways, there's kind of your recession watch. That's kind of our take on what we think happened. So were we in a recession? We say yes. Will there be? Probably not, especially with how strong the economy, the labor markets, and stock markets have been. But again, we don't really know. We're paying attention. Things look pretty positive right now, but it always makes sense to be careful.
Great. Thank you, Gage. We're going to turn it over to Rich, who's going to talk about taxes, our favorite topic.
I drew the short end of the straw, the short straw this week when we put our list together. No, just teasing. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for letting us take a minute of your day today. Tax brackets. Oh my gosh, what's changed? Well, what has changed is that the cost of goods and services in our economy have gone up, and the IRS raised the amount of each one of the brackets. If you look on the left, the tax brackets did not change, but the amounts found in the single, married, filing jointly, and head of household, those numbers have changed. They've gone up. So if you are considering Roth conversions, meet with your advisor. We don't want to bump you to a higher tax bracket. That's why we talk about these brackets quite a bit. But the key factor here is that just know where you fall, where your income is, and what marginal tax rate you fall into. The other benefit, I guess, there at the bottom, the standard deduction has also been raised in 2023. So again, just sharing this by way of general information. Hopefully it's helpful. Just know that for those that are doing Roth conversions, we'll be visiting more with you as the year unfolds, as we go forward. All right, the next slide is saving based on contribution limits. We feel that this was a slide I wanted to touch on real importantly, because this does directly have an impact on your tax deductions. If you're contributing to an employer plan, that the only option you have is a 401k pre-tax option, this will definitely impact your contribution. So the question here is, what does all these numbers mean? Obviously, we're not going to take the time today to go through all of these, but just know generally your limits were increased. If you look, let's look at the first one, a 401k for employee contributions. 2022 was at $20,500. That's been increased in 2023, a couple of $1,000s. So across the board, generally speaking, most of the contributions were increased by the IRS, and we consider that, and ERISA, and we consider that a good thing. That means you can save more in your retirement years. So visit with your advisor, make sure that you are attempting, not all are able to, but make sure you're attempting to increase, and if possible, maximize your contributions as you're preparing year over year, and you're taking advantage of not only your employer contributions, but your own employee maximizing those contributions as well. It's a really big deal. The last slide, I know there's a lot of words on this slide, so let me attempt to summarize this. The Secure Act was passed at the end of last year. It was kind of slid or bolted onto the infrastructure bill. This is a significant piece of legislation. First and foremost, many of you know that the RMD age has been increased starting this year to age 73. It's also going to increase in 2033. That's going to go to age 75. Obviously we're all living longer, and they're going to give us a little bit more time for those retirement accounts to grow. It's a good thing. But if you have ever forgotten to pay your RMD, you know, as I know, that there was a penalty that was exceptionally steep. This piece of legislation reduced the penalty if you forget. And it was reduced from 50% to 25%. And if you pay that off your obligation, then they'll reduce it even further to 10%. Now, a little bit of a quirky piece of this legislation is known as higher catch-up contributions. Now, I realize this is a little bit out in time, and if you find yourself in 2025 between the age of 60 and 63, this directly applies to you. What they're basically saying is today you can make a catch-up contribution of $7,500. In 2025, they're going to turbocharge that and allow you to make a catch-up contribution of $10,000 or 150% of the standard. So catch-up contributions are going up. We think that's a good thing and something that we're really favorable of. The last one I wanted to touch on in detail is 529 plans. For those of you that have these plans set aside for kids or grandkids education, and as you know, this money goes in and set aside for educational purposes. And as long as it's used for educational purposes, you can then use that tax-free. And especially the growth is not taxable. But what happens if you're left with $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 left in that 529 account? Well, as long as you hold that account for 15 years, this piece of legislation says, hey, you can roll that into a Roth IRA for that individual, for your child, for your grandchild. We think that's a good thing. So it would then literally just roll over from an educational account to a retirement account for the named individual on that account. So that's a good thing. If you have QCD contributions because you're a charitable giver, talk to your advisor. The rules have changed. Also, that if in your retirement plans with work, it was made a part of this legislation that employees can offer Roth vesting matching contributions. In the past, all employers could do was contribute to a pre-tax. Now they can also contribute to a Roth 401k or a Roth 403b. We think that's a good thing. And then lastly is that RMDs no longer apply to employer plans that have Roth accounts. So in other words, RMDs really are consistent from ERISA plans or 401k plans or employer-sponsored plans, as well as with IRAs. So now no more RMDs with Roth accounts, and that's a good thing. So there's a lot more other questions. Take advantage of it. Visit with your advisor related to how the Secure Act may impact you personally.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rich. We're going to turn over to estate planning with Kyrie now.
Hi, guys. Mine's not really related to the year necessarily, but this is just your friendly reminder to get your stuff in order. So when you're making an estate plan, the first thing you need to do is take inventory. This needs to be inventory of your finances, investments you have, bank accounts, etc., real estate. If you have any separate properties, bring those all together, precious metals, other valuables such as art, cars, etc. Take stock of all of these, put them all into one place so you can see exactly what you have. Once you've done that, you need to assess the needs of those you leave behind. If you have a spouse, will they be able to maintain your current lifestyle if you were to pass away tomorrow with your income? Do you have debt such as a mortgage, a car loan, etc.? Things like that, you might need to take a look at life insurance to protect from that debt. You might need to take a look at long-term care if you're worried about draining your assets before you do pass away and leaving nothing behind. So once you've taken stock of your inventory and once you've taken stock of your needs, you need to put those together and create a plan. Set up an instruction manual. Do you have a will in place? Do you have a trust in place if that's needed? What instructions do you have upon your death? This is your opportunity now to make sure that you can communicate what you want once you pass away. A lot of accounts don't need a will or a trust. They just need to set up beneficiaries, things like your bank account, your house, any investments you have. A lot of those you can just put in direct beneficiaries so that once you pass, Those just go directly to them. No court proceedings, no will, nothing else is needed. This is also where you can take stock of if you want to donate some to charity. Maybe your beneficiaries really don't need that much money. Who else needs that money that you would like to help? In addition, not only upon your passing, but beforehand, I want to make sure that you guys have a living will or a medical power of attorney, something in place that if you were to become mentally incapable of making your own decisions, that your wishes are still being respected. So once you've created a plan, the next step is to compile it all into one easy binder. This binder should include everything we just talked about. It should have all of those documents. I remember meeting a woman once several years back who her husband had recently passed away, and he was a hoarder when it came to financial documents. He had a room just full of documents dating from before the 80s onwards, and she had no indication of what was current, what had closed, what was important. I had most of it. She had none of that. So she had to spend months going through and trying to chase down all of this information. And a lot of those companies had closed over time. And so she had to figure out, what to do, etc. And so I just really want to emphasize, don't leave your beneficiaries like that. Create a binder. If that's too small, create a file cabinet. And in it include important websites that with a list of usernames and passwords. This is your everyday login for finances. Make sure that you have all of that info there. Account contract numbers, so they have easy access if they need to track that down. Also helpful is just the names and numbers of your doctors, your financial advisors, etc. In our case, if you have us as a financial advisor, you call in, and any assets you have with us, we can help smooth over that process so they don't have to worry about chasing that down. So once you have all of that in place, get together with your beneficiaries, have a meeting, explain, hey, this is where I'm going to have this information stored. Make sure that they know where those important documents are. And if you make any significant changes in the future, they will be able to know ahead of time what your wishes and your desires are. Just really what I want to emphasize is don't leave your family in the lurch, and help them know ahead of time. That way, when you pass, there's no stress over making sure that they have all of the finances taken care of. They can just take the time to mourn you and then move on to that.
Thank you, Kyrie. That is such an important thing. It's something that you don't really want to take the time to do today, but it's vital that you do, because then you regret not doing it when you need it. So thank you. Perfect. Now we're going to switch gears. We're looking forward to the second half. Here are some recommendations. Here are things we expect. If you guys have kind of gotten distracted, zoom back in. We're going to turn the time over to Lynn for a product update.
Okay, how much time do I have? 30 minutes, right?
No, you got like 8 minutes.
Oh boy. Well, okay. So real quickly here, we're going to just give an overview on, a lot of this is what we're already doing and we're going to continue to do. We've been doing this for 10, 15, 20 plus years now, and it's been very successful. A couple of little tweaks. We need to be looking at, and we are, and you need to be aware of a short term, because of that inverted yield curve that Gage was talking about. Short term's paying higher than long term, those types of things. Short term bonds and short term bond ladders, still pretty attractive. You're looking at in the neighborhood of about 5 to about 5.5% interest rates on those. We can help you with those. High yield savings accounts. If you have not been on bankrate.com, that's the general everybody, where you can see who's paying the highest savings rates in the country, who's paying the highest CD rates in the country. Great website to go to. One that I use frequently is breadfinancial.com. There are many others. I'm just sharing with you one that works real well, and be aware of it and get educated on it. Very simple to set up. They simply link to your local bank, and you get I think Bread Financial right now is paying 4.9% on savings. That's liquid, no fees, FDIC insured. If you're not linking your local bank stuff to a high yield savings, you're really missing out. Because you know what? The local banks are still only paying 0.2, 0.4. I mean, that's a gosh, I don't know. They were paying nothing a year or two ago. Now they're paying 0.4. Whoopee. So take advantage of that. I-bonds. We're not really promoting them as much as we did a year or so ago, because they're tied to inflation. And now that inflation has come on down, that's not quite on the radar, but we always keep an eye on it. and then other types of things for just that lazy. Get that lazy money to work. There's a lot of cash out there, a lot of cash. That's a good thing, but let's make sure we're getting interest rates on it. Now, let me just segue into a protecting your wealth from poor health. There are two basic ideas that we use there. One's called asset-based long-term care. We're not big fans of the traditional long-term care insurance policy. That's been around for a long time. And if you have one of those, that's fine. You're getting rate increases and so on and so forth, but it is coverage and it's certainly valuable. Don't cancel it just because we're saying that that's not the greatest idea. It may be for you. We just want to make sure we have that discussion. But how do we self-insure? How do we take assets, rainy day assets, and leverage them for what if? What if we do need long-term care? What if we do pass away prematurely, graduate, as I call it? Well, let's leverage some of that money so that we can put $1 into the machine and we can get about $2.50 tax-free out to pay those bills or to leverage toward our loved ones. So a great idea of leveraging and maximizing our money instead of just using our own money dollar for dollar to pay those bills. There's a thing called accelerated benefit with the life insurance policies nowadays, where you own a life insurance policy, but while you're living, you can access part of the death benefit tax-free. Isn't that interesting? Used to be life insurance where you have to die and it goes tax-free to your beneficiary. Well, now there are products, many, that say, okay, well, now that life insurance can double not just as a death benefit, but a living benefit, tax-free. I can take an advance on that death benefit to pay bills, tax-free for long-term care or terminal, and then move on. Okay. All right. So do we do a bank CD? Do we do short-term bonds? Do we do a multi-year guaranteed account? What's the answer to that? And to answer that question, I brought my crystal ball. Gee, I don't know how it works, but I was on a cruise here about 2-3 weeks ago, and they had a magician in there doing all kinds of magical things with this crystal ball and rolling it all over parts of his body. And he had 2 or 3 balls going at the same time. And all I know how to do is look at it. And I still haven't figured out how it works. So what's the better investment? Don't know. It depends. Everybody's different. But bank CDs are not liquid. Short-term bonds are. Multi-year are limited. Taxes, what's the tax on a bank CD? Typically, you're getting federal and state tax. On a short-term bond, it's Fed tax only. Okay, MIGAs, tax deferred. And then, of course, what are the rates? I've already said rates are in that 5 range right now, 4 to 5, 5.25, 5.5 even. So get educated and lock it in as long as you can, because that's a good thing to be paying attention to. And of course, are they insured or safe? All right, that's pretty much, I think, all I had to share.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn. We're going to move over to the Fed update for the next 6 months of 2023. Gage?
I feel like I'm like some kind of problem. Maybe I had my crystal ball working because we already know what one of those Fed increases was. July 25th, Fed sat down, increased rates a 1/4 point. They're targeting 5.75. So we're going to see a target increase rate right below 6%. What does that mean? It means that all of those short-term rates that Lynn was just talking about likely will be going up through the end of the year as well. So we don't think that's going to last for forever. We're feeling like we're plateauing. The Fed has already indicated that they're not going to be increasing rates too much more dramatically than what we've already seen. So we fully expect these fixed rates that Lynn was talking about to start declining in the next year or 2 or 3. So I agree with Lynn. I think it makes sense if you're looking at some lazy money you're not planning on touching for 2 or 3 years, might not be a bad idea to lock it in there, lock in those rates for 5.5, 5.7, and ride those rates out a little bit. Let's look at this last slide. So sorry, I'm geeking out on some of the data here again, but what I've got here is inflation, what they call a sticky price consumer price index. That's the blue line. And so that's what the Fed measures as inflation. When you wake up and see those Yahoo Finance reports on your phone, that's what they're reporting on. And then the federal funds rate, that's the rates that we've been talking about a little bit here today. That's tracked on the orange line there. And there's a trend that I want everyone to see here. Prior to 2008, the federal funds rate was usually on top of the consumer price index. For the last 30 or 40 years prior to the 2008 market correction, the Fed had always had their rates higher than what inflation was. And that helped to control inflation for the last 20 or 30 years. But what's an interesting trend that you've noticed since 2008, we dropped those rates all the way down to zero, and all of a sudden they kind of flip-flopped a little bit. Now consumer price index, or inflation, is higher than the federal funds rate, and the Fed is required to chase that inflation based off what they're seeing. This is a new dynamic shift. We're in kind of a brave new world here. We don't really know what this means. Usually the Fed has had to keep the Fed funds rate higher than inflation just to keep inflation at bay. We may not be in that world anymore. Who knows? We're not sure, but this is definitely something that we're paying attention to. The nice part of this whole discussion here is we can see that blue line. Inflation has really started to come down since the beginning of the year. These Fed rate increases, as dramatic as they have been, seem to be working. So inflation is starting to calm down. Markets are taking it pretty positively. I think we're through the worst of it at this point, but we don't know. I'm glad that I'm not having to make those decisions at this point.
Okay, thank you, Gage. We are now going to just ask some questions that I think everybody's been asking themselves in the past 6 to 7 months of 2023. So I'm going to just ask a few of you guys to answer these questions. First, I want to hear from Lynn, then I want to hear from Brandon, then I want to hear from Kyrie. How real is the recession risk?
Yeah, and I would say in conjunction with our presentation today, the recession risk this year, pretty slim. That was completely different discussion 6 months ago. Toward the end of last year, first of this year, it was kind of looking like, but things have changed. So I think the risk is pretty marginal, minimal, but not gone. It may be a year or two before we see it. My 2 cents.
Thank you, Lynn. Brandon?
Yeah, so I'll throw in a little bit more stats just as far. I think we're all in agreement. After the Fed meeting in June, Powell and the central bank staff said, yeah, there might be a light recession, but after this July increase, they pretty much said, you know what, the risk of a recession is pretty much gone. The economy is proven to be pretty darn resilient, and a couple things to back that up is number one, how the market's doing so far this year. Since 1929, the S&P has been up over 10% through June 28 different times. And when you look at the second half of what the market's done, 21 of those 28 times, the S&P 500 has ended positive for the second half of the year. And I think 13 of those 21 times, the S&P ended up in double digits. So real good growth potential. I think we're possibly entering another bull market period. For how long, I don't know, but based on all the history, that's what we're seeing. We may look back and say, hey, yeah, there was a slight recession already in 2022. We saw the 2 quarters of negative GDP growth that Gage talked about. And, the average drop in a recession in the markets, 32%, S&P dropped 25. So we were right along with the averages of the markets and how they react in a recession. But does that mean that there's nothing, is there no headwind coming in the future? I still think there is. And once we start to see the yield curve start to normalize, I think that's when we need to start being a little bit more cautious with, possibly getting into another recessionary period. But I think the markets and the recession risk in the short term are extremely low at this point in time.
Perfect. Thank you, Brandon. What about you, Kyrie? What do you think?
So I mostly agree with Lynn and Brandon, but that's kind of boring. So to play a little bit of the devil's advocate here, I've been watching and reading several things that have talked about, same kind of idea. They feel like we'll have a mild recession, if anything, in the short term, probably not much to worry about. But there are some indicators that make us wonder a little bit. Job openings are down since this time last year. They have shrunk quite a bit. And unemployment and layoffs are starting to increase, which leads to uncertainty and a lot less capital being spent in the market, which can slow the economy down. So kind of like Lynn and Brandon said, I don't think there's too much chance in the short term, but there are some indicators that we might still have somewhat of a recession here.
Perfect. Thank you, Kyrie. So it might get a little bit bumpy on the long term. All right. Next question. Is the banking crisis past? I want to hear from Gage and Rich on this one. Gage, we'll start with you.
Oh, I would say Rich probably should start on this one because I don't know.
Well, okay, I'll take a swing at this. I think the answer is absolutely not. Gage communicated that there's probably 2 more increases coming this year with the Fed. If that happens, that's going to increase the tension a little bit in the financials sector. Their books are going to get squeezed. Maybe they've invested in long-term bonds. And as you know, volatility in the bond market happens when bonds lose value. Those long-term bonds lose value when those rates are increased. So do I think that the banking crisis is past? No, there have been 3 regional bank failures so far this year. I think there will be more, and I would be surprised if we don't see more. Now, the question is, that I think is a bigger question, what do we do? What should you do if you have a sizable amount sitting at one bank? Gage will frequently, other advisors in our firm will say, maybe you need to diversify across multiple banks. And that's a good thing to do. So how much? That's really a personal decision, but I would say between 100, maybe 125, no more than that in any one bank. That's just kind of a quick snapshot. Yes, it's FDIC insured and protected, but be careful out there. Just don't put too much money in one particular bank. FDIC insurance is good, but at the same time, realize that the FDIC is not going to turn around and write you a check if a regional bank or national bank goes out of business. They're not going to write you a check tomorrow for the amount that went under. They're going to phase that back to you over a period of time, maybe 3 months, maybe even longer. So just be careful out there and just diversify your risk within the banking sector.
Just
Sorry,
to add a point to that.
It's a long-winded answer to an easy question, but
just to add a point to that too, when I was 16 years old, the richest man that I knew sat down and we went to lunch together. And I remember just being like enamored with him. He was in banking and had done all kinds of really cool financial things. And so I sat down with him and said, hey, what's the one piece of advice that you would give 16-year-old Gage? And he said, well, never keep more than $100,000 in any one bank account. I think about that advice now and I'm like, okay, step 1, get $100,000 in the bank. Step 2, make a second bank account. But I think honestly, we're, like Lynn said, we're sitting on historic amounts of cash. There's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines right now. If you just sold a house and you've got $300,000 or $400,000 just parked in your checking account, that advice is still true. You should probably look at diversifying your banks just in case we're not through the woods on this banking crisis just yet.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Gage and Rich. Let's move over to our last question. Has the S&P 500 hit its low for this cycle? Let's start with Lynn and we'll end with Gage on this one.
Oh, I brought out my crystal ball again. It says, I'm not getting a reading. I think there's upside potential there the rest of this year. I think we're on the same page. But we know that even within a year, that every year almost, and Brandon's pretty expert on this, and I'm grateful. I just want to say this to the team. You'll see we all have different areas of focus and expertise, and we're not all just robots. Everybody has opinion, expertise, study, and feeling. I'm the old guy. I have a little bit more of a conservative nature about me, and that's good and bad. But yeah, within the cycle, every year, going back 20, 30 years, Brandon, you can pop in on this. It seems like the market's been down during every year, at least 10 or 15%, almost every year. Is that right?
Yeah, going back to 1980, there's an average of 14% downturn within the S&P 500 on an annual basis.
And so that's the issue of, gee, don't panic. And, gosh, it's down. I better get out. So yeah, has it hit us low this year? I don't know. I'll leave it at that.
All right, what do you think, Gage?
I just see the words hit for the cycle and I just automatically go to baseball. So I don't even think I have an opinion on where I honestly think the markets have been so strong, like Brandon mentioned before, of the last 100 years in the market. This has only happened a handful of times. And the odds are in our favor that things will continue positively through the end of the year, with a slight chance that we might even see a double-digit return on the S&P 500 from July to December. Earnings are still really strong. Companies are still posting just phenomenal growth. The tech stocks in particular just have, man, they just won't stop growing. It's incredible. So I would imagine that we probably have hit our low point for the cycle. The markets, S&P 500 bottomed out in about November of last year. And I don't think we're going back to those numbers, at least until the yield curve recovers, until we start seeing things slow down a little bit.
Right. Okay. Sounds like we're cautiously optimistic on this one. All right. We're going to end with this last thing, top recommendations. We just talked for 50 minutes about a lot of stuff. Like I said, drinking water from a fire hydrant. But I'm going to touch on every single person that spoke today and say, what's your one top recommendation that you have for the last half of 2023 for everybody watching today? Let's start with you, Brandon. What's your top recommendation?
Check your mail. No, but once everything does happen in Labor Day weekend, make sure that you take the time to set up your accounts under the Schwab Alliance platform. That way, you'll be able to track your account and follow that. If you're already at Schwab, there's nothing that you need to do. You're already set and good to go.
Perfect. Thank you, Brandon. Lynn.
Hey, pay attention to short-term money and that long-term money, and they both belong in the portfolio. So if we've got a reboot opportunity, we need to talk on old money that was put to work 2, 3, 4 years ago. Let's talk about what we can move now, penalty-free, to get some better rates. And short-term, if you got a lot of money in cash, let's get some interest on that short-term money. And if we can lock that rate in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, let's talk about it.
Right. Thank you. Gage.
Let's go with know what you're invested in. Take a look at your statements, talk to your financial advisor, make sure that you know what you're in and know why you're there, and make sure that you're not invested in anything that you don't want to be in.
Thank you, Gage. Rich?
Yeah, we talked about taxes. I would suggest that you want to maximize the opportunity that you have to contribute to your Roth accounts. And it's been debated. I think it'll continue, but tax rates are likely going to go up in the next 3 years. And if that happens, you'll want to do as much as you can in the form of Roth conversions before that date happens. So it's all about Roth conversions. Make sure you're maximizing those.
Got it. Thank you, Rich. Kyrie, what's your advice?
With estate planning, my advice is if you don't have any documents in place, get on it. You never know when it's going to happen. Get on it. If you do have them and you haven't looked at them in 3 or 4 or 10 years, dust them off, review, see if you need to make any changes.
Great. And we do have a peace of mind checklist provided by Oxford Wealth Advisors that will help you organize all of that information. So if you are interested in that, please email someone at Oxford Wealth Advisors or give us a call at our office and we will get that to you. And then the last bit of advice I would have for you is call our office and set a review. If you guys have questions on any part of our presentation, our workshop today, please give us a call. We have people who are willing and able to help you out, answer any questions that you have, set up a plan for you, and make sure that your retirement is blissful, that you are making smart financial decisions. With
I'll handle all the easy questions. All of the difficult questions go to the rest of the team.
Here's our disclosure, just a reminder. I'll leave that up for just a second. And thank you so much for joining us. Hope that you received a lot of value from this session. Our advisors put a lot of work into this, a lot of thought into it for you. So we appreciate you attending. We will be posting this on YouTube as soon as we get it approved with our compliance department, and you can rewatch it. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions.